welcome back to Jewish Online Magazine, our feature on the golden age of Ilford Jewry, and we have Jerry Goldstein. Thank you for joining us again, Jerry. In our last video clip, we concluded by talking about Ilford Jewish Primary School. Was there a reason why there was no, or there might have been, was there a discussion about a high school, a Jewish high school?
Yes. I think in the early 80s it was discussed that a secondary school was needed, and a few people got together and formed the King Solomon High School, which has also been very successful and has got very, very high results and good attendance. So
in the 1960s, I understand the Jewish population in Ilford, the London Borough of Redbridge, was about 20,000.
Well, I remember when I became warden in the early 80s, we had 30,000 Jews in Ilford.
30,000?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we at Beehive Lane had, that was in the whole of our area.
Yes, yes.
And then at Beehive Lane we had 3,000 members. And in those days we were regarded as the largest Jewish community in Western Europe.
That's absolutely incredible.
Beehive Lane.
That's incredible. And did the population of Ilford Jewry continue to grow and flourish into the 1970s?
70s, yes. 80s, yes. And in the 90s it started to decline when people started to move over to northwest London.
What other memories do you have, Jerry, of the golden era of Ilford?
Well, I think one of the two major factors, we've spoken about the Ilford Jewish Primary School, was the building of the King Solomon High School.
Right.
And also the Sinclair House.
Yes.
Became a major asset to the Jewish community, particularly the elderly Jewish community of Redbridge. And then you followed up by the likes of Chigwell. Clay Hall was formed within Sinclair House. Clay Hall Synagogue, which is very successful to today, was an offshoot of Beehive Lane. It was formed by members of Beehive Lane who couldn't walk to Beehive Lane and needed a shul in the Clay Hall area. And that's why they formed their own community with the wishes of the board of management of Beehive Lane.
Why do you think, Jerry, there were some people maybe in the 80s, 1980s, who decided that Ilford wasn't for them and decided to explore different areas in North London?
Well, as you very well know, David, there's a tremendous difference between Yiddishkeit in Redbridge and Yiddishkeit in northwest London, because you've got so many restaurants over here, you've got so many different things going on here.
But Jerry, couldn't have Gants Hill, Ilford, Clay Hall, couldn't have they have had those facilities, and those people that left would have remained?
In hindsight, yes, probably you're right. Yes, you're probably right. We didn't have the foresight to make it more attractive than it was. But
so if we could turn the clock back, or go into Doctor Who's TARDIS,
if we could turn the clock back, we'd do a lot of things differently. But there's so much choice over here. There's so many things going on. You could go every day, every night, and go to a different activity.
Do you think maybe it was contributing factors of the war years, maybe Holocaust survivors, the Holocaust survivors' children's circumstances that perhaps people's focus wasn't on Yiddishkeit. Not anybody's shame or fault. It was just circumstances that perhaps Ilford Jewry were living in a generation where, after the war, things were a bit different.
No, I don't think that at all. I think we had a lot of Yiddishkeit in Redbridge. We had a thriving community, as we've discussed, in Beehive
But they didn't
Lane.
stay, Jerry, that's the thing.
They didn't stay, yes, I know. And in hindsight, we allowed Chigwell to grow. And Chigwell today is one of the major shuls, or in fact, the major shul in the whole of that area, in North East London, without a doubt. That Chigwell today is a thriving force. Clayhall is not doing so badly either. Chabad is doing extremely well.
So people that say, Jerry, that Ilford has had its day, maybe it hasn't.
Well, I'm a great believer that, and I've always have been, and I've expressed this to many people, including the Chief Rabbi, that given the right religious and lay leadership, Beehive Lane can return, not to what it was, but still to be a prominent community.
That's very encouraging to hear.
Well, that's my opinion. That is my personal opinion, but nobody seems to believe me.
So, with regard to, we've discussed the 60s and the 70s. The 1980s was a period when King Solomon High School came on the scene.
Yeah.
And that's also been a very successful school.
Very successful indeed. Very successful.
And why do you think, Jerry, that the area was unable to attract more restaurants, considering, 20, 30,000 Jewish people were living there?
It's a good question. I really can't answer it. It's a very good question. It's a difficult question to answer. I really don't know. I really don't know. I think people wanted to go over to northwest London because there was a far greater choice.
Well, were the leaders of the Ilford Jewish community able to perhaps learn some lessons from Jewish communities in North London and see perhaps how they could be as successful as other communities in London?
Somehow or other, it was always given to understand that east of the Aldgate Pump, Jewish community, as far as the United Synagogue is concerned, never existed. It was a known fact. And east of the Aldgate Pump, forget it. And, the likes of Reverend Black, who was the shining example of the success of Beehive Lane, somehow or other, we could not attract the caliber of the rabbinical leadership to the area. For some reason, I don't know. And I was very instrumental when we had the controversy of the Silas situation, as you're probably well aware of, in the mid-80s. We tried our very best to bring in high, dynamic, rabbinical leadership. But if they wanted to come, their wives didn't want to come, and we had a terrible trouble. So we had to go to Hull in northeast Yorkshire to import a rabbi, Reverend Rabbi Broder, to come to Beehive Lane.
Okay. We'll conclude part 2 and we'll be back soon.
Thank you.